Okay, now that we've talked about both the bottoms-up method and finding a GCF and factoring out the GCF, remember GCF is greatest common factor. We're going to start combining these. So from this point forward, whenever you're asked to factor, the first thing you need to look for is a GCF. So let's look at our first example. We have 6x cubed minus 12x squared minus 288x. And you're hoping to goodness that you have a GCF because we haven't talked about how to factor an x cubed. And 288 is just gross. So let's look for a GCF. So looking at the GCF, 6 is the smallest number. We know 6 divides 6. Awesome. 12 is divisible by 6. That gets us 2. And when we take 288 divided by 6, we get 48. Don't worry, you don't have to do any of that in your head. You just use your calculator. 288 divided by 6. We get a nice whole number, which means we are going to have a GCF that includes 6. Now we need to see if we can include a variable in our GCF. Notice that each of our terms does have an x, so we need to figure out x to what power is going to be in our GCF. Remember, we can only take out what everybody has. Our last term, that 288, only has an x to the first, so that's all we can take out, which means our GCF is going to be 6x. We're going to take each of our original terms, and we're going to divide by our GCF of 6x because we need to factor it out. And if we're factoring out a GCF, we put our GCF out front and open a set of parentheses. 6 divided by 6 gets us 1. X cubed over x, 3 minus 1 gets us an x squared. Drag down my minus. 12 divided by 6 gets me 2. And x squared over x, I have x squared, so x times x. Take 1 away, I have an x to the first left. Bring down my minus. We said 288 divided by 6 got us 48, and x over x cancels out. When we were looking only to factor out the GCF, we could call it quits. We would be done. We would circle this answer. But now we're past that. We have to move forward. And because in the parentheses, we have an x squared, we need to see if we can factor more. We're going to use the bottoms-up method to continue our factoring. A is going to be 1. That's our coefficient of the x squared. B is -2. And C is -48. You may be wondering, well, what about the GCF? The GCF is like that annoying sibling that your parents tell you you have to take with you to the mall or out with you and your friends. Once you get to the mall, you tell them, go do your own thing. I'll pick you back up before we go home. So ignore the GCF for a while. I'm going to draw an arrow back to you and your friends inside the parentheses. We're looking for a product of A times C, which is 1 times -48, which gets us to -48. And we need a sum of B, which is -2. So you can start listing all the different numbers that multiply to be -48. So for instance, I started with the numbers they gave us. But when we add 1, and negative 48, we get negative 47, which is not negative 2. So we move forward. Next number up from 1 is 2. 48 is divisible by 2. 2 times 24 gets us 48. I need one of them to be negative to get to negative 48. When I do 2 plus my negative 24, I get negative 22. Next number up from from 2 is 3. 3 and 16 multiply to be 48. I need one of them to be negative. And when I add 3 and negative 16, I get to negative 13. So I'm getting closer. 4 and 12 would work to multiply, but when you add 4 and negative 12, you get negative 8. The numbers we're going to need are 6 and negative 8. We wouldn't have included 5 in this list because when you take 48 divided by 5, you get a decimal, not a whole number. So it's not a factor of 48. And when we add 6 and negative 8, we get the negative 2 for which we were looking, which means that we found our magic numbers. Magic numbers of 6 and negative 8. Which means when we get to our factors, we're going to have x plus 6, because the 6 was positive, times x minus 8, because the 8 was negative. You know we're supposed to divide by a, which in this case was 1, and we simplify our fractions. 6 divided by 1 gets us 6. 8 divided by 1 gets us 8. But if we circle this as our final answer, x plus 6, x minus 8, your mom is going to be so angry at you. You left your sibling alone at the mall by themselves when you were supposed to bring them back home. So we took out that GCF. You have to bring it back with you for your final answer.